A silent cry for help. The city was alive with the sounds of honking cars, footsteps in haste, and occasionally the murmurs of a street musician far away. Amidst it all, there sat a teenage boy, invisible and unseen. He sat crouched on the edge of a teeming sidewalk, his back against the chill stone of some building, one knee up with a scrawny fist, clutching a flattened cardboard sign lying on it, saying in angled, desperate scratching all over it, in words, hungry and cold, "Anything helps." Danny kept his head low, his greasy hair falling into his eyes, as he rattled the cup in his hands occasionally. The coins inside sounded very soft, barely audible against the roar of the city. Most people went on their way without glancing, eyes fixed on phones or the pavement ahead. A few glanced his way, fleetingly sympathetic or dismissive, before they moved on. When he turned 17, the boy carried with him a life that was anything but kind. His mother had died when he was 9, and his father had dived deep into addiction until he disappeared altogether. At the age of 15, Danny found himself alone, shuttling between shelters and harsh streets. His ambitions of finishing school, of having a life that didn't involve begging for spare change, now felt like distant fantasies. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm orange glow over the city and then dipping, allowing the lights of the city to twinkle. Danny sat in his usual spot, trying to disregard the bitter chill seeping into his bones. His stomach growled loudly, a painful reminder of the sandwich he'd had the day before, the only meal in nearly 48 hours. He clutched his sign tighter, willing someone to stop and see him as more than just a nuisance. As Danny sat there, lost in his reverie, a sudden, thunderous roar filled the street. He looked up, startled, to see a sleek black motorcycle come to a stop right in front of him. A burly man, all clad in leather and wearing dark sunglasses, swung his leg from the bike with ease of use. His boots hit the pavement hard as he turned to face Danny with an expression cold and none too friendly. For a moment, Danny's heart lifted. Maybe this man had stopped to help him, to offer food or spare change. But as the biker took a step closer, the harsh curl of his lips told Danny otherwise. A cruel encounter. The biker loomed over Danny, his shadow stretching across the pavement. He crossed his arms, the leather creaked a little with the movement, and let out a dry, mocking laugh. "Kid," he said, his voice rough and loud enough to make a few passers-by glance over, "what are you doing sitting out here? You think holding up that little sign is going to fix your life?" Danny said nothing. He knew well that, with people of this kind, silence was often the best defense from people who saw what happened in his life and instead of trying to help him, belittled him. But this biker wasn't through. "You're wasting your time, you know," he said in a highly disdainful tone. "Why don't you get up and do something instead of sitting here like a beggarly dog? Get a job. Make your way. Just sitting is not going to bring you anywhere." Danny's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on his sign. He wanted to say something, explain that he tried to find work, tried to get off the streets, but no one wanted a homeless teenager who had no address and no clean clothes. He wanted to scream that he wasn't lazy, wasn't some kind of freeloader who just didn't care. But words wouldn't come. The biker laughed at Danny's silence and kicked the boy's cup with his booted foot. The few coins that were inside fell onto the pavement, rolling in all directions. Danny got down on his knees to pick them up, his face burning with humiliation as the biker laughed. "Yeah, that's what I thought," the man said, shaking his head. "Pathetic." As Danny picked up the last coin, a voice cut through the din, a deep voice, even in tone, that made the biker freeze in mid-laugh. "Hey, man," he said calmly but commanding. "What do you think you're doing?" The biker turned, his face faltering for a moment as he faced the figure approaching him. The crowd that had been cautiously watching from a distance began to shift, parting slightly to make way for the newcomer. As he stepped forward, the streetlights illuminated his face, and a collective murmur rippled through the onlookers. It was Mike Tyson. The champion steps in. Wearing a simple tracksuit and sneakers, Mike Tyson did not look anything like the heavyweight champion of the world at that particular moment. But his presence alone was enough to command attention. The crowd, which had been indifferent to the earlier commotion, now stood riveted, their eyes fixed on Tyson as he walked toward the biker and Danny. The biker, who a moment earlier was so full of bravado, now shifted uncomfortably under Tyson's gaze. "What's your problem, champ?" he asked, forcing a laugh that came off more nervous than confident. "My problem," Tyson said calmly but firmly, "is watching a grown man bully a kid who's already down. What do you think you're proving by acting like this?" The biker opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. He glanced around, noticing the crowd that had formed, and the way everyone was watching him with disapproval. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Look, I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. This kid needs to learn to fend for himself. Begging isn't the answer." Tyson took another step forward, closing the gap between himself and the biker. Casual as his tone was, there was an unmistakable intensity in his eyes. "You think you're teaching him a lesson?" he asked, low and measured. "Let me tell you something about lessons. They don't come from tearing people down. Real strength, real courage, it's about lifting people when they need it most." Mutt snorted in derision and shook his head. "Whatever, man, you don't know what it's like out here." Tyson's face gentled a fraction, even if his tone remained firm. "You're wrong about that," he said. "I do know what it's like. I've been where he is. Felt what he was feeling. And I'm telling you, what he doesn't need is someone pouring salt into his lacerations." An unexpected turn. The tension in the air was palpable as Tyson turned his attention to Danny, crouching down so they were at eye level. "What's your name, champ?" he asked softly. "Danny," the boy stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Tyson nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Danny, don't let people like him define you. You're stronger than you know. And you're not alone, okay?" Danny nodded, and tears brimmed in his eyes. In a way, for the first time in months, he felt seen. Tyson pulled a crisp $100 bill out of his pocket and pressed it into Danny's hand. "This is for you," he said. "But it's more than just money. It's a reminder that people care. And I'm going to make sure you get more than just a meal. You're going to get a real chance." The biker said something under his breath, his disposition changed and now ill at ease as he turned away. But Tyson caught him with one glance before more than a single step was made. "One more thing," Tyson said, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd. "Kindness isn't weakness. Remember that. A ripple of kindness." The biker turned back to his motorcycle, defeated, saying something under his breath. He didn't even look toward Tyson or the crowd, quickening onto his bike. All swagger was gone, replaced by discomfort and shame. The roar of the engine quickly drowned out the whispers of the onlookers as he sped off into the night. Danny watched the biker disappear, his hands clutching the $100 bill Tyson had given him. His emotions swirled, relief, gratitude, and disbelief. How could someone like Mike Tyson, a world-famous athlete, step in to defend him, a homeless teenager that most people overlooked? For Danny, the moment felt like something out of a dream. As Tyson stood and turned toward the crowd, his voice was low, even authoritative above the murmurings. "This is not about me," he said, pointing at Danny. "It's about him and kids like him all over. He doesn't need judgment. He needs compassion. We all do." The crowd started to stir. The murmurs grew louder as people exchanged glances. Tyson's words had bitten deep, and one man stepped forward, a suit jacket slung over his shoulder. Reaching into his wallet without a second thought, he pulled out a $20 bill and handed it to Danny. "Here, kid. Get yourself something to eat tonight," the man said with a warm smile. The gesture was like a key turning in the lock. One by one, people started to come forward, pressing money and food into his hands and offering words of encouragement. A woman reached up and tied a scarf she had been wearing around Danny's neck. Another person set a steaming cup of coffee beside him. "I've been there, too," said a middle-aged man, his voice soft but filled with empathy. "It's hard now, but you'll get through it. Keep your head up." Danny's eyes widened as the pile of kindness grew before him, more than he had ever dared to hope for. The once bustling street corner had transformed into a small beacon of generosity, all sparked by Tyson's act of compassion. Next, as the crowd's generosity went on, a man in his early 50s came forward. The man was casually dressed, but with an air of quiet confidence about him. He had been standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the scene with his arms crossed and his expression contemplative. Now, he stepped forward into the light and addressed Danny directly. "You said your name's Danny, right?" he asked. Danny nodded hesitantly, clutching the scarf around his neck. "I'm Mark," he said, extending a hand. "I run a small mechanic shop a couple of blocks from here. I can't offer much, but if you're willing to work hard, I've got a part-time job for you. It won't make you rich, but it'll give you a place to start." The crowd fell silent, their eyes shifting to Danny, who was blinking in dismay. "A job," he repeated, shaking. Mark nodded. "Yeah. You come by tomorrow morning, and we'll figure out the details. No strings attached." Tears welled up in Danny's eyes as he nodded fervently. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." Tyson clapped a hand on Mark's shoulder, his smile genuine. "That's what I'm talking about," he said. "One act of kindness can start a chain reaction." The crowd erupted in applause, not for Tyson, but for Danny, and for the collective humanity that had brought them all together. A reflection on strength. As the crowd started to disperse, some remaining to offer Danny more encouragement, Tyson stood back, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. He turned to Mark, who had remained behind, and the two men exchanged a nod of mutual respect. "You know," Tyson said, his voice low, "I've met a lot of tough people in my life. Guys who thought strength was about how much you could take or how much you could dish out. But real strength? It's what you just did." Mark smiled modestly, his hands in his pockets. "Sometimes people just need a chance," he said. "We all do." Tyson nodded, his eyes moving back to Danny, who was now talking excitedly with some of the remaining onlookers. "Yes," Tyson said, almost to himself. "And it's up to us to give them that chance." That moment brought Tyson back to his journey, those dark days in Brooklyn, barely making it, till someone saw the potential in him and helped him rise. He knew what it felt like to be given a second chance, and he knew how life-changing it could be. A changed perspective. And just about overnight, Danny's life started to change. The next morning, he showed up at Mark's shop, scarf on, clutching a bag of food he'd bought with the night's money in hand. Mark welcomed him with open arms and didn't waste any time giving him the tour. The work was hard, but Danny dove in, anxious to prove himself and earn his keep. The word on the street of the incident started to spread. Videos of Tyson standing up for Danny went viral, flooding social media platforms with headlines such as "Mike Tyson teaches a lesson in compassion" and "Kindness is strength." In one stroke, it touched a chord with millions of people to reflect upon their behaviors and attitudes to those in need. Something miraculous happened on that street corner where it all started. The place where Danny would sit, cold and invisible, became a beacon of hope. People started leaving small acts of kindness there, such as notes of encouragement, food, and even donations to local homeless shelters. A plaque was erected there later, bearing the words from Tyson, "Kindness isn't weakness. Remember that." The legacy of one night. Several months later, life for Danny was completely different. He no longer lived on the street, but rather rented a small room near Mark's shop. He had savings enough now to buy new clothes and was even studying to take his GED in the evenings. Furthermore, he often visited the street corner where he first met Tyson, only this time to provide help to others in need of it. As for Tyson, he continued to inspire. In a television interview following the incident, he modestly downplayed his role in the affair. "I just did what anyone should do," he said. "That kid, Danny, he's the real champion. He just needed someone to remind him of that." Cruel is the world, but in those moments, the power of compassion reminds us. A simple act of kindness by Tyson changed Danny's life and started a movement that proved even the tiniest gestures can leave a lasting impact. Danny's story is one of the resilience of the human spirit and the profound difference a single person can make. What will you do to make that difference? Moved by this story, share it. And remember, kindness isn't a weakness. It's the strongest thing we got.